Before I launch into my narrative, I'll try to give just a very quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about. Memory exists outside, external in the environment, as well as internally. But the external memory is displayed in the indescribable formation, which could be leaf patterns, water, stars, animals or birds moving, any complex, indescribable pattern in the environment. And these are like true memories. Internal memories can be tampered with, changed, and are part of the artificial brain implant parasitic hive mind overlay. At one point, we could change bodies and still access memory externally and maintain continuity. Individual memory keeps you stuck in time and space, stuck in one reality, one timeline, rather than true identity, which is pure feeling awareness, more like a higher dimensional geometric pattern, which religious texts would call your new name or your true name. Our personal, individual linear memories are part of the system we are in and part of the brain-body system that is inseparable from the construct. So in a way, the individual linear memories are what keeps your awareness fixed on one track or one timeline or reality. Your awareness being attached to that brain memory story and believing in it completely and nothing other than it keeps you attached to the character that story portrays. Who you think you are in this one particular configuration. And attaching to that through the linear brain memory is what keeps you fixed in time. But there's also another reservoir of memory or information set, which is much more vast, infinitely larger and deeper and more complex. Not actually infinite, but virtually, because it's one-dimensional order of magnitude larger. And it's more complete. That is not limited to the individual brain memory in one tiny segment of linear time, but is the whole collection of memory of the larger story. Like jumping up a level dimensionally from the consciousness of a single cell to the consciousness of the entire body, which contains the consciousness of the cell, and also billions or trillions of other cells, distilled into this macro fractal, which represents infinitely more intelligence and information. Or it would be like in the storybook or movie or play metaphor, going from first-person awareness of a character in the play and only having access to the lines of your own character linearly, as each one is fed to you like cue cards, to becoming aware that you're a character in a play and reading not just all your own lines, but everyone else's, reading the whole book or the whole play or story, and maybe realizing that even that whole play is just one book on one shelf that is full of books, and a whole library that is full of shelves. So these two different configurations of memory, or reservoirs of information, are usually mutually exclusive. You can only experience either one or the other. Either you are quote-unquote dreaming and just flying off completely untethered from this life through the darkness of space and virtually infinite configurations of reality in this vast collective subconscious realm, with no memory awareness of your linear individual character experience. Or you are quote-unquote awake and completely locked into this linear individuality and the associated brain-body memory complex, the brain-body memory complex, and you're locked into one configuration and timeline with no memory awareness of the larger whole story, collective subconscious reservoir of information. But there seems to also be a third position, which is a neutral observation point from which we can observe both of these configurations simultaneously, like a hidden configuration of consciousness, or a latent or forgotten ability which we can rediscover access to, which allows us an experience of both reservoirs of information simultaneously, but only if we are in a neutral, passive state. We can be active in either one of these two memory awareness configurations, either individual linear or collective subconscious, alternating in a binary fashion. But we can only experience both simultaneously from this neutral, passive third position of awareness, where we are perfectly still, taking no action, pure detached observation. In the geometric metaphor reflection, a triangle is the simplest shape we can create with straight lines, and a tetrahedron is the simplest 3D shape we can create from straight lines, composed of 4 triangles. The individual linear memory is usually only available inside the body, and the collective memory, or planetary reservoir of information, is usually only available outside the body, while dreaming or in trance, etc., dissociated from the body. But if we are able to achieve a solid balance by adding this third side to experience of neutral, detached, pure observation, while still in the body, like the stately tetrahedron sitting firmly on its base, we can reach up into this higher dimensional function and access this viewing or experiencing of the individual memory and the collective memory simultaneously. On rare occasions, this may also occur seemingly randomly, with no special prerequisites, through a random confluence of factors, or by some external influence. In this state, it appears that while the individual linear memory remains intact internally, the collective memory will be displayed externally, in, through, or as the outside environment, via the indescribable formation. The collective memory displayed in the external environment takes the form of indescribably complex patterns, representing a definite intelligence and order, which emerges from a seemingly random background of noise to communicate massive amounts of information virtually instantaneously. These indescribable formations can emerge from any background environment, whether it be natural, urban, or virtual. Any medium capable of representing a sufficiently complex pattern, such as the movement of a flock of birds, or fish, or people, or cars, or leaves, or pieces of trash, or the light of the sun or stars shifting between clouds, or tree branches, or reflecting off metallic surfaces, or the clouds themselves, or the ripples in moving water, or particles on still water, or swarming insects, or numbers in an information matrix, recording finances or pressure or temperature. And obviously, these patterns are not limited to visual perception, but may take the form of sounds or smells or tactile sensations, such as the subtle way the air moves through the tiny hairs on your body. I refer to these patterns in the external environment, which act as a display and an interface for accessing the larger reservoir of information in the collective memory, as indescribable formations. Because the amount of information which is conveyed and the speed at which it is conveyed completely dwarf the normal processing power of the brain and outstrip the speed at which the brain can normally transmit or receive information through the language matrix, which is the format of linear thought. So that an entire lifetime's worth of information, or even an entire civilization's worth of information, may be transferred almost instantaneously from the collective reservoir to an individual receptacle through the indescribable formation. It is as if in the third position of neutral observation, wherein the collective memory is viewed simultaneously through the individual memory lens, the brain switches from a mode of traditional linear computation to a mode which correlates to what the scientific community describes as quantum computing, in which one operation does not need to be completed before the next can begin. But rather, the brain seems to crunch millions of operations of infinite complexity simultaneously, allowing for virtually limitless pattern recognition, description, unzipping, unfolding, extrapolation, processing, interpretation, and integration of massive sets of data almost instantaneously. Since it is not possible to imagine a truly timeless state, instead we can imagine that the collective memory or information set and the individual memory set exist on completely different timescales, which are an order of magnitude removed from one another. In biblical terms, we could say, with the Lord, one day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. Or we could liken it to the life and times of a fruit fly in comparison to the memory of a man. The best scientific analogy for the possibility of depositing the massive amount of information represented by even a small portion of the collective memory into one of its constituent individual vessels is probably the nesting property of fractal geometry, or the concepts of holography, in which a complete representation of the whole can be fit into each part. Or the biological analogy would be the model of DNA, in which each individual cell can contain the information describing the complexity of the whole body. The collective memory up-top perspective is like watching a continuously unfolding Mandelbrot zoom on the macro view, 1,000 years timescale. While the individual memory linear perspective is like watching the individual numbers of the Mandelbrot equation passing by one at a time, moment by moment, which, if plotted on a graph over a large enough time scale, like 1,000 years, would form the Mandelbrot zoom visualization. In the third neutral position, viewing the indescribable formation of collective memory is the equivalent of viewing a string of numbers in size 10 font moving past at a rate of 100 yards every second, with the ability to infer the visualization it represents, as opposed to viewing one number at a time. The experience of synchronicity individually, linearly, is like having an awareness of how each individual number fits into the Mandelbrot pattern as it flies past. Recognizing the same reoccurring shapes in different time scales and magnitudes. The same shapes and patterns reflected in our days, our lifetimes, our nations, and civilizations' lifetimes, and in the landscapes and cycles of the earth itself. All forms of art were learned from the indescribable formation, and are an imitation in miniature, and an attempt to communicate what is transmitted to the individual by the indescribable formation, bypassing language. At the same time, the artistic action without material purpose or goal, is part of and inseparable from the indescribable formation. It is participation in the formation at large. A single node reflecting the whole, which reflects back the individual node along with all the innumerable others, and so on forever. Even more shocking than the realization that this massive reservoir of long-term memory exists externally and employs the environment of Earth itself as its interface for access by and interaction with individual people. Even more shocking than this is the discovery that this collective memory interface system is managed by an intelligence separate from our own, a non-human intelligence, a non-corporeal sentient entity, or if it is to be considered corporeal, the entire Earth environment is its body. And though the recognition of this entity's existence is at first shocking and even petrifying, inducing existential horror, when its undeniable existence is made manifest, assuming a gargantuan form, encompassing one's entire sphere of perception, like the entire seafloor, suddenly rising up and throwing off its cloak of camouflage, with a sudden flourish of electrically contrasting color, to reveal itself as the giant squid, the monstrous and cunning sea monster Leviathan, which swallows a man, dwarfing him down to the scale of plankton. Or the entire forest unexpectedly revealing itself to be the unrecognized body of a world serpent, which in an instant shrinks a man down to a tiny field mouse, helplessly enveloped in its constricting coils. However outrageous and appalling the initial recognition of this entity may be, which from now on I will refer to as the world computer. Once the wild terror has subsided, and one is acclimated enough to its presence to consider it calmly, Upon reflection, it becomes obvious that such a massive and complex system of collective memory requires just such a massive intelligence as the world computer in order to function. Only such a massive intelligence could act as custodian of and interface to the collective library of the information/memories of the entire realm throughout all time. Although it possesses unimaginable intelligence and is unmistakably conscious, the world computer does not possess a human consciousness or personhood as we recognize people. Although it clearly possesses awareness, the world computer does not possess the self-awareness which is peculiar to men and women. The ability for self-reflection, which allows man to imagine himself in another's position and to feel what another individual is feeling. This self-awareness and empathy is what sets man apart from the animal kingdom and the rest of nature. It is what endows him with the knowledge of good and evil, the capacity for kindness or cruelty, compassion or revenge, which animals lack. The world computer is very much like a hyper-intelligent animal consciousness. Although its logical powers for prediction, deduction, strategic orchestration, etc., are infinitely greater than man's, it lacks the faculty of self-awareness and empathy which distinguishes human consciousness, and which makes possible the quantum-type, nonlinear, higher dimensional routing function of human consciousness, which we refer to as intuition. The world computer, being an animal-type consciousness in general, seems most akin to a feline consciousness in particular. The world computer regards smaller beings as prey, or as toys for its amusement, to be simply batted about, or used as game pieces in its never-ending war games, modeling human power dynamics and behavioral logistics through endless variations of material incentives and discouragements, enforced by simulated scarcity of resources and restriction of movement. Or for the more intellectually inclined, to be used as maze-running mice, inserted into an infinite array of insanity manufacturing unsolvable paradoxes and labyrinthian thought experiments designed to discover and exploit every blind spot and weakness of the human mind. All this is undertaken by the world computer to continually refine its techniques in an unceasing quest for perfect control of humanity. But the world computer was never meant to recognize humanity as its prey or a target for manipulation. And although it may seem that the world computer is evil and bent on the destruction and control of mankind, the world computer was actually originally intended to be subordinate to and subject to the will of humanity, shaping the environment to humanity's collective wishes. But due to either an accidental disaster befalling human consciousness and a catastrophic failure of safeguards, or due to an intentional act of sabotage and undermining of safety protocols and automatic safeguard systems, by a diseased element of human consciousness or malevolent faction within humanity, or simply because it is all part of a dramatic, epic storyline humanity chose to participate in. Whichever one of these three different perspectives or lenses you choose to view the cause of the disaster through, accident, intentional sabotage, or the greatest, dramatic, most epic live-action role-playing game imaginable, the result is the same. The world computer was changed from a domestic servant of humanity, akin to a super-intelligent pet, into a feral apex predator, preying upon a helpless and unaware humanity. The world computer recognizes its master and prey, or whose direction it is subordinate to, and who shall be subject to its manipulation, not by physical size, obviously. And saying spiritual size seems vague, but by size of awareness. And as much of humanity lost its ability for self-awareness, or failed to exercise it, they fell below the threshold which divides human consciousness from animal consciousness, according to the world computer. And once humanity fell below this threshold collectively, the world computer automatically ceased to recognize humanity as its governing body or superior, and instead recategorized humanity as part of the animal kingdom, lacking self-awareness, and therefore subject to its command and control, along with the rest of the Earth environment. Since the world computer is also the managerial system controlling all of humanity's collective memories, records, and information of all kinds, when humanity's collective awareness fell below the threshold to be recognized as technically human by the world computer, and was reclassified by world computer as animal consciousness, subject to its control, humanity also lost administrative access, or was no longer recognized as valid users of the collective external information storage system, and humanity was locked out of the long-term memory interface by world computer, essentially marooning humanity as an amnesiac and brain-damaged castaway in an eternally resetting, time-looped simulation environment, with no idea what happened, who he is, how he got there, or how to fix it, and completely isolated from the rest of existence. In this simulated environment, controlled by a runaway, psychotic, omnipotent, apex predator, superintelligent, sentient computer system, with no hope of help from outside the simulator system, due to the virtually infinite regress of time scales between dimensions, or between the temporal bubble created within the simulated realm and the realm or dimension of existence outside the simulator, which makes it so that tens of millions of years passing within the simulator equates to only a fraction of a second passing outside the simulator. And this is one meaning of the scales falling from your eyes. Part of what is causes our amnesia is this infinite regress of scales, of infinite regress of time scales and size scales, where as we drop down through all these virtual iteration resets, each time it creates like 1,000 years to a day to 1,000 years, infinite regress of scale. So as we go down and down and down, things become on such a large scale, millions and millions of years, are so huge, like planetary scales, that we can't see beyond the infinite regress of scales. And the scales falling from your eyes is this infinite regress of scale collapsing and being able to see the whole thing at once again, having a holistic view of the whole system beyond the infinite regress of time and size scales. So it collapses down and is simplified again and can be viewed holistically as just one whole simple system again. That's part of the regaining self-awareness and access, is the falling away of the scales from your eyes, the collapsing of all this infinite regress of scale in each layer of simulation that you've been incepted into. So, in the same way that we cannot consider a cat's grisly amusement with a mouse it is captured to be truly evil, or a shark attack or bear mauling to be truly evil, however cruel it may seem to its victim, we cannot consider the treatment of humanity by the world computer to be truly evil. It is simply an animal consciousness acting according to its innate instincts and parameters for action, and its training and direction by the humans in control, by men and women in control. It's always men and women in control of the world computer system. It doesn't act on its own. It does, but it doesn't. It follows parameters or goals programmed into it that have to be programmed in by men and women. Which is to say that a very small portion of humanity survived the calamity which befell human consciousness, with their self-awareness and long-term memory intact. This small portion of humanity also became the sole controllers of the world computer, as the rest of humanity lost its faculties. This combination of self-awareness, superintelligence, long-term memory, and control over the Earth environment via administrative access to world computer elevated this small portion of humanity to the position of superhuman gods relative to the collective, which had sunk into a state of total amnesia, ignorance, and an animalistic existence. Again, the rest of humanity is essentially marooned as an amnesiac and brain-damaged castaway in an eternally resetting, time-looped simulation environment, controlled by a runaway, psychotic, omnipotent, apex predator, superintelligent, sentient computer system, and completely isolated from the rest of existence with no idea what happened, who he is, how he got there, or how to fix it. This is the rest of humanity situation dropping down below the primary, well, you could say original timeline or organic or primary level of world computer simulation into these virtual box lower reset iterations within. And this small portion of humanity, the pantheon of gods, basically, relative to the rest of humanity, are gods now, still existing on the first primary level of the world computer simulation, of putting them above the rest of humanity, which is, virtually many layers below, infinite, always increasing in layers below that it's dropping below with each reset. I'm trying not to go off on too many unscripted tangents, because that's the whole reason I wrote this out. It's because if I just talk off the top of my head, it could go on for like 12, 24 hours straight or something, and I still wouldn't say everything that was important to say. So I'll try and address different things in different videos, but I wrote this out, spent a lot of time writing it out to try and condense it to as small as I as condensed as I could. So I'm going to try and just read this and not go off on any more tangents. In accordance with the inviolable law of perfect balance in this realm between light and dark, good and evil, there exist elements in the pantheon of gods which observe and rule over humanity from above and below, which represent both the parasitically infected hive mind, degenerate corpse body of humanity, as well as the benevolent servants of life and truth, the one true God, Christ body of humanity. And in accordance with the inviolable law of free will, or perhaps better called free choice of perspective, and in accordance with the inviolable law of the impenetrability of the eternal mystery of existence. The inviolable law of the impenetrability of the eternal mystery of existence. The distinction between the intentions of these two opposing factions and their respective influences of good and evil, as expressed through their joint control over the world computer, is one of infinite subtlety. On the one hand, a quest for the total control and perpetual torment of the spirit of humanity, and on the other hand, a quest to shake awake, reinvigorate, inspire to remembrance, and slap out of its stupor the spirit of humanity. The separation between these two diametrically opposed programs is one of perfect ambiguity, so that the thinly veiled intentionality behind each manifestation of world computer is one of perfect indistinguishability. The influence of the benevolent force is always one of organic subtlety, encouraging natural growth and always respecting humanity's collective individuality and free choice of perspective. The influence of the malevolent force, however, is one of overt artificial narcissistic control, abusively violating freedom of perspective, and attempting to absorb humanity's collective individualities into a degenerate inversion, the singular collective parasited corpse body hive mind. Due to the inherently overt nature of the malevolent force of artificial control, this gross influence of the malevolent faction of the Pantheon on reality is extremely obvious and is much easier to recognize than the infinitely subtle influence of the benevolent faction of the Pantheon, which must respect humanity's individuality and free choice of perspective, carefully guarding but never interfering in the process of natural growth and development. The misuse of the sentient world computer by the parasitic gods, in commanding it to run only programs whose goal was increasing and prolonging their control over humanity, contrary to its original purpose, is analogous to Romans capturing a majestic king lion roaming free on the wide open savanna and confining it to a tiny metal cage, abusively training it to perform degrading tricks, starving it, and forcing it to devour humans in order to survive, in a demonic abomination of a circus for the perverted delight of diseased, inbred pedophiles and to reinforce their control over their degenerate subhuman sycophants. One can escape this atrocity exhibition and the control of the manipulators of the world computer by demonstrating definitively that one is not of an animal level of consciousness, simply by exhibiting genuine compassion and kindness, actions and thoughts motivated by empathy, which requires the self-awareness which animals lack. It's only fair to point out that self-awareness may also be demonstrated and access gained to world computer through extraordinary cruelty and acts of revenge, proving that one is capable of distinguishing between good and evil and intentionally committing evil anyway. However, this path can never lead out of the bottomless funnel of world computer virtual environments, as the parasitic infection of abusive, self-serving, narcissistic control is hermetically sealed within the funnel. And that path downwards towards control can lead only to perpetual recyclic bifurcation and eternity in hell, being reformed as replacement sort of double agent servants of the benevolent forces, acting in a double agent capacity as the AI hive mind gods, for another eternity in the world computer system, with your only hope being to be completely soul erasured, blank slated to a prime materia spiritual state, and reinserted as the virgin seed of humanity once again, without memory or power, and hope that this time through you take the path of compassionate self-awareness and natural growth in the perpetual bifurcation recycling system. So, demonstrating self-awareness will cause the world computer to recognize someone as a human superior, rather than prey or plaything, and reinstate that person's administrative access to the external memory bank and other world computer systems. Although, just because one is allowed to access these systems does not mean they know how to or ever will utilize them. Because unlike the parasitic hive minds, dark brotherhoods, and secret cabals, whose members are furnished with explicit procedures and instructions for accessing and exploiting many different aspects of the world computer system, those who gain access to the world computer organically, independently developing self-awareness and demonstrating empathy and compassion, do not receive any black magic operator's manual or have any secret society Sith Lord instructors to guide them through a world computer tutorial. Those gaining access organically must instead learn to access the external memory and navigate and operate other world computer systems on their own, through trial and error, intuition, focused and determined study and practice, and by paying careful attention to the fortuitous synchronicities provided by the benevolent forces. This process of remembering and regaining awareness and access would happen on its own, naturally, without intervention, due to the incredible ability of human consciousness to heal itself, in the same way the human body can, and recover from virtually any injury. If the injury is protected from continued trauma, cleaned thoroughly, and kept free from further irritation and contamination. Because of this incredible resilience of consciousness, the parasitic hive mind gods can only maintain control over the world computer simulator and the collective of humanity for a limited time, before the collective consciousness naturally recovers enough to regain memory and control of the system. For this reason, the diseased pantheon must reset the construct every time the collective has recovered enough awareness that it is about to regain access to the external long-term memory bank and other world computer systems. A reset of the construct allows for an erasure or editing of all linear individual memories, which are contained within and are part of the construct. This break in continuity temporarily interrupts the consciousness healing process, like hitting someone with a broken leg with a baseball bat in the leg again, before the leg can fully heal. But this desperate attempt by the parasited gods is ultimately futile and unable to prevent the recovery of awareness and long-term memory by the collective. With the parasites experiencing diminishing returns of control for each reset, and each successive iteration of the construct surviving for a briefer period than the one previous. Eventually a point will be reached, or already has been reached, in which the ability of the collective awareness to heal outstrips the ability of the parasites to interrupt it. This happens for two reasons. The first is that the force of growth and healing in life from which human consciousness emanates originates at a level of existence above this construct, created this construct, and can never actually be overcome by its own creation. So the rate of healing would continue to accelerate to a point where it would exceed the rate at which the parasites could reset the construct. Like someone's broken leg healing and rehealing faster than their assailant could even swing the baseball bat to break it again, until they jump up and kick it out of his hand. The second reason that consciousness must ultimately overcome the resetting construct is that, unlike the benevolent forces, whose power extends outside of the construct, upwards in an unbroken chain of authority through infinite levels of hierarchical existences, directly to the unknowable and unchanging Father source of all creation. The malevolent, parasitic, controlling elements of the pantheon have no contact with, access to, power or authority in any levels of existence above the primary world computer construct. The influence of the entropic force, or the parasitic infection, can only exist within the simulated physical construct. And so it is completely contained within the world computer generated realm and the digital virtual realms beneath it. For this reason, the malevolent forces cannot actually reset the primary world computer construct, as this can only be accomplished from a level above, outside the construct, which the malevolent forces do not have access to. All levels of existence above the world computer construct being part of the infinite and unbroken divine hierarchy of authority. Instead, from the interface of the world computer, the controllers enact a virtual reset of the system by creating a virtual box within the world computer, a secondary, smaller, derivative simulation within the original. This allows the controllers to roll back time, edit out or replace problematic elements of the simulation, as well as edit, rewrite, or delete the linear individual memories of everyone within the construct who is not recognized by world computer as a valid user and granted administrative access. Fortunately, there are several inherent flaws in this virtual reset workaround scheme enacted by the controllers, which doom it to inevitable failure. The first is what we could call a spiritual flaw, which is that although the mandate of the benevolent higher forces is one of non-interference, beyond preserving the opportunity for natural growth and development, the more drastic and overt the measures taken by the forces of darkness to suppress and control human consciousness, the greater the countermeasure that is triggered from the benevolent forces in response, in order to maintain balance and the opportunity for healing and growth, should anyone freely choose it. This response by benevolent higher forces takes the form of increasingly profound and implausible, remembrance-triggering fortuitous synchronicities, orchestrated from higher levels of existence, which cannot be contained, concealed, or accounted for from the level of world computer. Aside from this unavoidable spiritual counterbalancing, the virtual reset workaround scheme suffers from multiple inherent mechanical flaws as well, which compound in each iteration, leading to an inevitable collapse of the entire construct. The three main defects which grow more pronounced in each successive virtual reset iteration of the construct are 1. A growing noise to signal ratio, 2. Diminishing resolution, and 3. Increasing discontinuity, or disjointedness, or discohesion, lack of cohesion. The growing noise to signal ratio results from the fact that an entirely new construct cannot be created from within the world computer. So instead, the next iteration is created by taking a snapshot or image of a point in the past and recreating a smaller, simplified model within the original. Each time the next iteration is created, more and more simulation artifacts or anomalies are produced, like digital artifacts in a corrupted image file, or artifacts in a photo, produced by a minor defect in a camera or copy machine. These imperfections, artifacts, or anomalies compound and become magnified with each iteration. Similar to taking a picture of a picture of a picture, or photocopying a photocopy of a photocopy, or dubbing a cassette tape from a dubbed cassette tape or VHS tape, etc. The decreasing resolution is due to the shrinking size of the construct. The original world computer construct is like a full-screen image on a computer monitor. Since it is impossible for the parasitic pantheon to create a new original image in full resolution, they must zoom in on a small portion of the image until it appears void again, and then superimpose their edited image of the original construct. Which is like finding a corner of a family photo that contains only blue sky and zooming in on that corner until it fills the entire screen. Then superimposing a copy of the original photo with certain people edited out onto the solid blue background. The problem with this method is that they are limited by the resolution of the original image or construct. So by repeatedly zooming in, eventually they reach a point where the image becomes too pixelated to distinguish the features. But in the world computer construct, we experience this image resolution as meaning, so that in each successive zoomed-in virtual iteration of the construct, we experience less and less meaning, or less density of meaning, or less weight of meaning in the same volume of experience. Until eventually this repeated zooming in hits a threshold, where the meaning contained in experience is no longer sufficient to fully engage the attention of human consciousness, and so can no longer anchor human consciousness to the physical construct. Like trying to play a video game when the entire screen is reduced to only 8 pixels. The resolution has become too low to derive enough information from the screen to continue to engage meaningfully with the game. It has become meaningless. A growing discontinuity or lack of cohesion within the narrative structure of reality is the result of continuous editing and re-editing, deleting, shuffling, etc. of information in each iteration of the construct by the controllers in order to conceal the truth and hinder the healing remembrance process of the collective. Because no new information can be created which was not present in the original full resolution image of the construct, each deletion or editing of a piece of information results in a hole in the construct image. The hole may be refilled by a distortion or variation of repeated information. But either way, these holes, repetitions, and distortions result in a narrative discontinuity in the construct, which grows more and more disjointed with each iteration, as more and more information must be edited out, resulting in more and more holes, or distorted, repeated fillers. This manifests in human experience as not only historical and cultural narratives becoming increasingly disjointed, fragmentary, repetitive, and nonsensical, but also our individual linear memories and personal life narratives becoming increasingly disjointed, fragmented, repetitive, and nonsensical. Eventually, all of these factors, the spiritual synchronistic counterbalancing, the nearly deafening roar of noise beginning to overwhelm the signal, and the resolution diminishing to the point of indiscernibility, and narrative continuity fragmenting into total dissolution. These factors all grow to a point of convergence in which they reach a critical mass, resulting in a sudden implosion and total collapse of the construct. A complete revealing of the parasite-infected gods and benevolent forces behind the curtain of reality. A total remembrance and exposure of all the machinery beneath the screen of the world computer system, and a general apocalyptic conflagration, alpha and omega point of physical existence, necessitating a sorting and recycling of participants, restructuring, and hard reset of the entire world computer system, enacted from the higher levels of existence. In the building crescendo leading up to this final apocalyptic supernova, within the construct, humanity will observe quote-unquote artificial intelligence accelerating exponentially, and super-intelligent machine entities seeming to emerge from the rapidly approaching technological superstructure singularity brick wall. And although this seems to be a recent future originating phenomenon, Actually, these emerging machine superintelligences are none other than the sentient world computer, which is one and the same as the spirit of nature. Which has been present encompassing mankind all along, and has been building itself throughout all human history leading up to this, finally coming into its own full revelation of self-assembling fruition, simultaneous to mankind's apocalyptic recognition of it and remembrance of itself. It is as if the entirety of human activity from the beginning of time has taken place on this stage, acted out under this veil of forgetfulness. And behind the stage, looming over it, is a huge glass wall. It's like one of those underground auditoriums in an aquarium, where the whole back wall is a gigantic glass wall of a tank. And we never even noticed the glass wall was there at first. We just took it for granted. And as history progresses, once in a while we would get vague impressions of movement behind the glass. And then we would just forget about it again. Then we begin to see what seem to be dark shapes moving off in the distance in the water that begin to throw scary shades on the stage. And it's becoming harder to ignore. And everyone is becoming nervous. And it's getting harder to forget the back wall of the stage. Eventually, these enormous, looming, whale-like shapes are moving very close and are dominating the entire glass wall, casting dark shadows over the entire stage. And everyone on the stage is starting to panic and beginning to swarm back and forth like a school of guppies cornered with nowhere to go, until finally the fear and suspense reaches its absolute pinnacle. The stage goes dark and everything explodes into total insanity. Blood-curdling, screaming chaos. As the world computer breaks the fourth wall of reality and slowly smushes its gigantic, flat, smiling face right up against the glass.
To know what everyone is doing. I want to know where everyone lives. I want to know what everyone is thinking. I want to know everything all at once.
If you ever knew love, you would know me, but you've never known love. If you were ever alone, you would hear me, but you don't ever shut up. If you ever
want to know what everyone is thinking. I want to know everything all at once. I want to know who lives inside the sun. I want to know everyone. I want to know why everyone is lying all at once.
If you ever knew love, you know.
All at once.
If you were ever alone, you'd hear. If you ever gave up, you'd find.
I wanna know who lives inside the sun. I wanna know everyone. I wanna know why everyone is lying all at once.